What happens when a San Francisco PI has to hit the mean streets of LA? Welcome to the Devs. Hello, welcome back to Reading from the Depths. My name is Lecton. Thank you for spending some time with me today. So today I have a review of Mirage City by Lev AC Rosen. This is the fourth book in the Evander Mills series, and I received a complimentary copy of this book from the publisher in exchange for an honest review. It is coming out in early October by St. Martin's Press. Now, I already did a review of the first three books in the series, which I read a couple months ago. Those would be Lavender House, The Bell in the Fog, and Rough Pages. And so I'll link to my review of those three down below. But the basic premise is the main character, Evander, or Andy, is a PI, and he is a queer PI living in San Francisco in the 1950s. And now, he wasn't always a PI, he used to be a police officer, and the very first book sees him being fired from the police force, not just for being gay, but for being caught in a gay club on his knees. And as a result, he wants to end his life. And that's how we find him in the very first book. But he stumbles into becoming a private eye and working cases for the queer community. What I really love about this series is that he grows as a character throughout every book. And that includes in this fourth book. You know, he starts out as a very closeted gay man who wants to end his life. And then he stumbles into like a found family situation. And then from there, he develops and understands what it means to be himself. So this series is constantly looking at what does it mean to be a queer person in the mid-20th century America, but what does it mean to know yourself, to understand yourself? And we get to go on that journey along with the main character, Andy. And so even though each story is self-contained with whatever mystery that he's trying to solve, that mystery is paired with his own kind of emotional growth. So there's consistent emotional growth between him and the ancillary characters in all of the stories. And that, you know, in this story too, now the fourth one in the series, that's still true. He's still learning about himself. He's still in new positions and new situations, meeting new people. At this point, especially, they're looking at gay rights activism and what different groups within the queer community think is appropriate ways to engage in queer activism. And the story is using historical queer rights movements and showing how there were internal divisions. And so those internal divisions in those movements are then paralleled in his own life. You know, and the interesting thing about this story, which I really appreciated, is that they left San Francisco and he had to go to LA. He had to go to LA to try to find someone. It's a missing persons case, essentially. And, you know, I will say over the last three stories, the atmosphere of San Francisco was feeling a little overwhelming. And the reason is he's a proper PI, but he can't go to the police, right? And the one occasion where he's interacted with some of his previous coworkers, they beat the living hell out of him. And so because of that, everything is really contained. There is this oppressive atmosphere where he has to always not hide who he is, even as he grows into what it means to be a gay man. Not necessarily hide who he is, but he is held back from doing his job completely. And that also limits the kind of stories that we can have, the kind of mysteries we can have, and the kind of justice or retribution that can be had when the people that are being victimized are queer people and society doesn't care. And even if he solves the case, he doesn't have any legal authority to do anything. And to bring his, findings to the legal authorities would put him in danger. So you have this that kind of hangs over all of the stories. And so the environment of San Francisco is getting a little heavy. And so in this case, moving to LA to follow a lead, to go on a case, I thought was great. It gave him a chance to meet new people and to be able to walk around and not be as overwhelmed by fear of being out in the city. But then using that freedom, you add more complications. The big one being that his mother lives in LA and he hasn't come out to his mother. His mother doesn't know he's queer and he's terrified of coming out to his mother. So you have that becomes your added emotional stakes. I think what Lev AC Rosen does really well is character. You know, he has written a number of YA stories, and this series isn't YA, but it's close to YA. It also wouldn't be considered, I think, a cozy mystery. There's just a little bit too much violence and maybe a little bit too much spice to be considered cozy, but it's very, very mild. The spice is maybe some kissing and some heavy petting on top of the clothes. Like, it's very mild, and the violence, there are a few moments of really heavy violence, but it's never elaborate, it's never elongated, it's never kind of gratuitous in any way. It's enough that it probably wouldn't be categorized as a cozy mystery, but it's really close. And I think that YA/cozy sensibility works well because it lets you have this kind of noir atmosphere and almost a noir style, yet it is done in a way that's really expansive and it gives space to explore character and to explore environments. You know, I think the characters in this series and this story specifically are great. The characters are wildly diverse. They show off a whole range of what queer life in mid-20th century America looked like, and That's always been the case, right, in all these series. But this book, especially, I think it does a good job because he is so much more, Andy, the main character, is so much more sure of himself that his relationships are deeper than they have been in any of the previous stories. And so, because of that, you get to learn more about these other characters. Now, the characters are so wild and diverse, they're almost flirting with caricatures or stereotypes, right, of what it meant to be a queer person or a drag queen or, a butch or any of these things. But at the same time, it feels like they're all real people. They have lived in personas. They feel genuine. They feel heartfelt. And they feel like they are voices and stories that too long have been denied, right? So even though they flirt with stereotypes, they still feel authentic. And they feel, refreshing to see these characters depicted as either the heroes or ancillary to the heroes in the story. So in that way, I think that the cast is wildly diverse and it's fun, and you just want to spend time with all of them. Now in this one, you only get to spend a little bit of time with most of the characters you've gotten to know over the first 3 books. In the beginning and the end, when he's in San Francisco, you get to spend time with characters you've already met. But most of the characters are new characters that you meet when he goes to LA. Now the writing, I think, is similar to the other books in the series. It is playful, it is propulsive, and it complements this noir tone really well because it doesn't shy away from that genre of being, detective fiction. And at the same time, it is doing things its own way. It is creating a space in that genre and in that sentimentality to have these expansive characters, to have deep internal work happening as he's going about solving this mystery and going about, finding clues and doing investigations and so forth. And so the writing, it works in that general vein, right? It is descriptive, it is fun. To be honest, I think that of the 4 novels in the series so far, this one is maybe the tamest. And I wouldn't have minded if there was, a little more bloody knuckles and broken noses, whether that be literal or metaphorical. I think that it went deeper into his emotional relationships without putting any spice on the page. But the emotional relationships were kind of paramount. I think that there could have been, a little more of the noir kind of graphic imagery and violent imagery that even not like making it obscene or over the top, but it was of the books in the series, it was the tamest. So I wouldn't have minded if it was a little grittier in that way. Yet I do like the way he plays with the genre, and it's very clearly this noir piece, this detective piece. It's set in 1950s California, yet at the same time it has this playfulness to it. So I would have liked this one a little grittier, a little meaner almost, but I still enjoyed what he was giving. At the end of the day, this is a mystery story, so the mystery itself has to hold up. That has to be a fun element to the story. And this one, I think, is great. It is a missing persons case that sees him leaving San Francisco and trying to hunt down these people. In the process, he gets involved with a gay biker gang, as well as with the Mattachine Society, which is an actual society. That was one of the first societies that was pushing for gay rights, but then they kind of split up, and there was some controversy, and that is dealt with in the story. Now, I'm not quite sure. It seems to be a little bit loose with some of the history there. It's pointing in the right direction, but it's a little bit loose around the edges with some of the history, but it's pointing in the right direction of the history. And so you have these different elements coming in as he's trying to find these characters, these people who have gone missing. Now that's paired up, like I said, with this anxiety of him seeing his mother. He hasn't seen his mother for many years. He talks to her maybe once a year or twice a year, like on the holidays and on his birthday. She gives him a phone call. So other than that, he hasn't seen her in many years. And now he's in her hometown, and his investigation causes him to cross paths with her, as of course, it has to. And so because of that, he is super anxious and resolving what his relationship with his mother is like now. If he's going to come out to her, if he's not going to come out to her, what that would mean. That is the emotional heart of this story. And what he does well in this series is, like I said, you do have these 2 aspects, right? The mystery aspect, and that involves trying to hunt out clues, do investigation, interview people, and so on and so forth. And then the personal growth aspect, right? The emotional aspect where he's going on an inner journey. What I like is that these intersect in all of the stories, in all of the novels, but they aren't the same thing. It isn't like whatever case he's going on is suddenly that little revelatory piece that makes him understand himself better. It isn't a one-to-one. It isn't like solving this case makes him understand who he is as a queer man. Yet solving this case causes him to interact with other people in such a way that starts a cascade of either emotions or events that causes some sort of introspection on his part and some sort of growth. So I like that. I like that it isn't one-to-one. I like that they are intersecting paths that build off of each other, right? So in this case, when he's in LA, he's in the city where his mother lives, and not only that, his investigation brings him to her place of work. So he has to interact with her in that way, so he can't pretend that he's not there. So the case itself isn't paralleling his internal journey, but it is forcing him to do something, right? And I think that's handled really well. I think it allows the case to feel like it has this kind of very stereotypical noir vibe while letting there be emotional depth to his own personal story. And so then the novel as a whole is a great combination of genuine, heartfelt emotion as well as, like, this really kind of gritty police work. Though I will say this one wasn't quite as gritty as I would hoped it to be, but still, like, very, dyed in the wool police work, investigation, and all these kind of things. So the story's able to combine these two elements really well. I mean, I mentioned already that I think this is the tamest of the four novels, and I would have liked the stakes to be a little higher. Now, the emotional stakes, like I said, are quite high, and him navigating what it means to be a gay man in the same city as his mother, and if he's going to come out to her or not, and will she still love him or not. Like, those are really high emotional stakes. I would have liked the stakes for the crime and for the investigation to be equally high. And they're always high in the missing persons cases. You never know if you're going to end up with a dead body or what you're going to face. And he has navigated high stakes in the other novels, fishing dead bodies out of the river, going up against the mafia, dealing with both book banning and book burning and censorship, going up against the San Francisco police force, all these things. And this one, it just feels a little bit more low stakes. And I appreciate that it gives more space for his inner growth and the emotional journey. I would have liked there to be a sense of danger as well, and it was there, but it wasn't as much as I wanted it to be. It didn't feel as critical to the story. And yet, in the story, he does manage to explore many of the similar ideas that he has explored in all the other stories. Ideas of representation and authenticity, of culpability and compliancy. What does it mean to know yourself, to be part of a community, to understand how that community fits in a larger system, as well as questions about family and relationships, both platonic and romantic. And, what would you do? What would you sacrifice to support or protect those that you care for? And how can that lead to internalized homophobia sometimes, when you think that what the best way to protect someone is to deny certain parts of yourself? So all these questions are things he's playing with, and they never feel heavy-handed. They feel like they're a natural part of our character's journey, which is done really well. And I think that also comes from the fact that Lev AC Rosen has a history of writing YA stories, so he knows how to take character and make all of these kind of emotional areas of growth part of the character themselves. And so that, I think, is done really well. So even if the stakes aren't quite as high as I would have liked them to be, the mystery itself was fun. I think the resolution to the mystery was fun. It felt earned. Everything felt like it made sense within the scope of the story, and the way his own personal storyline wrapped up, I also think made sense. Him as a character, I think he's grown so much across these four novels. So for me, you could pick this story up and just read this on its own. You don't have to read the three novels that precede it. The author gives enough information in this story that you can kind of locate yourself in time and space and know what's going on. Yet there's such great character work done and character development done across the series that I do recommend starting in the beginning, if anything about this sounds interesting to you, because one of the most fun parts for me is seeing this character grow into himself, seeing him deepen in his relationships, seeing how the better he understands himself and the better he's able to accept himself, the more worthwhile his relationships with others can become. That everything doesn't have to be transactional, but he can actually find, companionship and joy in being with other people. So I do recommend reading the first three first, not because you have to. And if you just find this one, you pick it up and you're interested, then great, you can go for this. It'll make sense. There's nothing that you're going to be losing in terms of narrative. But I do think there's character work that seeing the growth of the character is a fun part of the story. It does a good job with the historical setting, taking place in the 1950s. Like I said, sometimes it feels like it's playing a little loose with some of the facts of history, but overall, the setting and the vibes feel appropriate. And I like that the way the characters exist, it's not 21st century mentalities that have been, transposed into the 1950s. I think that he does a good job of making the characters represent what it would be like being a queer person in the 1950s. So the characters and the environment work together to create a setting or an atmosphere or a mood that I think is, a really good representation of genuine queer life in America. And it honors like the struggles that many queer people went through in, at that point in history, while still telling a fun story that you want to spend time with that isn't all doom and gloom. And so I think everything about the story is fun. He has the characters down, which is most important. The environment, the setting, the location feels genuine. You can feel like you're there. And the stakes in this one aren't that high, but in general, the mystery elements, which are important to a mystery story, are all like competently done. The clues are there, the pieces are there. His work as an investigator feels legitimate. It doesn't feel like he's just going through the motions. And yet that is all paired with this emotional storyline that intersects with the criminal investigation in a way that makes sense, which makes the story just more compelling and more enjoyable. And, it makes it exist outside of just this one novel, but as something bigger than that. So I had a fun time reading this. I'm really glad I picked up this series in general. It was actually another booktuber who first did a review of Lavender House that got me inspired to read the series. And I happened to be able to get all of the first 3 books from my library as audiobooks right away. So I listened to all 3 of those kind of back to back to back. And then I saw this 4th book was available as to request an ARC for, and I'm really glad I got a copy of it. I had a good time with this. Now, I haven't read anything else by this author. I've looked at the other books he's written, and most of them are YA, but some of them are adult as well. It looks like a lot of them exist in this space of, new adult or cozy adult, as well as YA. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you read any of the other books in the Evander Mills Mystery series? Have you read anything else by this author? What do you think of queer historical fiction? How hard is it to get that tone right? And does that work for you or not work for you? I'd love to hear all your thoughts, ideas down below in the comments. But for now, thank you for spending some time with me today. I appreciate you. Please be kind to yourselves, take care of each other, and go slowly.